we see each other. For those that it's the first time, perhaps you were not able to be here in the first session. My name is Fabiana Whites. I was very honored to be invited to teach this course in legal English. Again, it's going to be second session out of 4. Third of 4 sessions going to be next Friday and Saturday, focused on legal translation. But today, in a very, let's say, different perspective of what we saw last time, which was basically devoted to see constitutional law. Today is something completely different. You might remember that I told you that legal English compiles different topics, like from a very broad perspective, and studied from a very broad perspective. Constitutional law is one. You can see others like tort law, which is civil procedure, litigation, etc. One of those topics includes contractual law, which I really found very interesting and very useful in terms of more, let's say, a more pragmatic approach, not a very theoretical approach. So I decided to okay. So that's for today. Actually, my experience as lawyer for almost 20 years now, it's been on corporate matters and contractual law. Right? That's basically my expertise. Perhaps I told you before, I've been working as an in-house counsel, which is basically the lawyer of a company, that it's basically devoted to see all matters related to that company or group companies for 17 years. So I know a little bit about that. And that's why I decided today to share about my experience based on that contractual law that I've been studying for all this time. And not only studied it, practice it as well. Contractual law, it's a very interesting topic as well, because it's a very international subject, right? I mean, to make a contract here in Mexico between Mexican parties, being you and me, or 2 Mexican entities, it's basically the same or almost the same in terms of how a contract is formed between that same Mexican individual with a Italian individual. It's just a matter of really setting the right terms and conditions between the parties, right, to set up a contract. The rules might change based on the fact if that deal goes wrong, how that can be ventilated in terms of courts, perhaps. That can change throughout, let's say, throughout different countries, because different countries have different types of law. But in contractual law, it's pretty standard now. It's pretty standard now. And this is because regulations have to be now standard because everyone is doing business with everybody throughout the world, right? So nations are trying to approach, and the laws of those nations are trying to approach to have the same set of laws and regulations to govern those contracts. Our job as lawyers, and this is what we're going to try to see today, it's to be able to provide consultation for our clients as to for creating those contracts, or in case those deals went wrong, what should be done if that happens. You can be some sort of preventive lawyer, in which you're very careful in creating that contract just to be able to see if the terms and conditions that your client wants to see in that paper, if it is a paper contract, by the way, are there. Or perhaps you're a more corrective contractual lawyer, which is more devoted to see what's going to happen if something went wrong. Or perhaps you have a little bit of both, right? This is what we're going to try to see today. And based on the previous session, I would like to have the same mechanism. We have a little break between, around, what is it, 11:20, around that. and have a discussion, questions and answers at any time, by the way, not only for you guys here, but for people at home. And that's it. So let's start. Oh, on the second part of the session, I would like to devote a little bit of time of producing or sharing with you tips, a more pragmatical way, maybe, because contracts are a little bit boring with its own here. Right. All right, so please, let's start. Next, please. Contract law basics and some random and hopefully not boring tips by Fabiana Williams. So what is a contract? What's that? Give me a lot of things, really. There's a lot of definitions for that. It's so ample and extended. Can mean a lot of things. But let's try to settle into one single definition just for the sake of this course today. It's a legally enforceable agreement between two or more parties. I'm sorry, man. Yeah. I'm sure this guy ends up exhausted after this session, even more than me. Thank you so much. The core, okay, let me repeat that. Thank you so much. Legally enforceable agreement between two or more parties. Parties is not like parties, right? A party is either an individual or an entity. And that an entity means not only a company as such, it can be an association, for instance, right? And non-profitable organization, that could be an entity as well. It doesn't really have to be an entity that it's devoted to profit, such as Grupo Industrial Saltillo. A little bit of a commercial for my friends. So legally enforceable, what's that mean? Enforceable, to enforce. Mandatory. Okay, that's one. Anyone else? As to enforceable. Meaning that can be enforced, to be executed, to be demanded in court if something goes wrong. Right? It could be somebody can actually request the execution or the performance of that contract because a contract was won. That's enforceability. We'll get to that later. The core of most contracts is the set of mutual promises. In the US, the language for contracts always involve a promise. It starts with a promise. I'll invite you to the movies tonight. That's my offer. And you would say, yes, okay. We have a contract. There's a promise there. We need to put that in writing? No, of course not. We're just friends. But is it a contract? Yes. Is it enforceable? I cannot take you to court because you missed the movie at 8, but we had a contract, right? That's a promise. It's a promise that begins to have a more materialized form, right? A promise raises up to be a contract. The core of most contracts is the set of mutual promises, which in legalese, by the way, legalese it's jargon. It's the way lawyers talk, right? Not very complex type of concepts, right? Legalese, which is called consideration. Whatever you get out of that deal, it's the consideration that those parties are getting from that deal. In Spanish, contraprestación. Have you heard about that? Right? I'm sure if you have seen a contract here in Mexico, you have a clause there that reads either the price or the payment or the contraprestación. That means What am I going to get out of this contract? If I contract you to build my house, out of that deal, I'm going to get a house. For you, out of that deal, you're going to get money. So that's consideration. There has to be consideration involved for both parties. Both have to have something out of it. If somebody in that relationship doesn't get something out of it, the contract formation process varies widely from contracts formed quickly face-to-face, and we go to the movies, to contracts formed after armies of attorneys are involved. We're dealing right now with contracts of one-to-one. That's not necessarily true. It can be a contract between 6 parties, 20 parties, 25 parties, who knows? More than 2. That's the standard. Contracts, as we said before, are enforceable in courts. If one party meets its contractual obligation and the other party does not, the non-breaching party is entitled to receive relief through the courts. That's a lot of words. That's a lot of legalese in that last line. I'm going to jump a little bit ahead just to say that the default, if somebody fails to comply with the terms and conditions of a contract, that's the definition of breach. Breach. Have you heard about that word before? Breach. Non-compliance, breach, or default is just the same thing, right? So if one party meets its contractual obligations and the other party does not, the non-breaching party means the party that actually complied with the contract, it's entitled to receive relief through the court. We'll get to the relief part today. It's either relief or remedy. I need to get something out of this because you failed to comply with your promise and our contract, so I need to be relieved out of it. We'll see how relief is created. First line, contracts are mechanisms by which society works, etc. There's no way society can work without a contract. I'm pretty sure that before you got in today here, you at least enter into a contract. If you went to Starbucks and I see a Starbucks cup there, you purchased that. Is that a contract? Yes, of course. Did you sign anything? No. But you purchased something, you paid something, and you got something out of Starbucks, right? If you're here today taking this course, it's because, I don't know, perhaps, I think you paid for this, isn't it? Yeah. We have a contract now. You get this, all of this nonsense that I'm speaking, and, right? Because you got a contract to be here. The company that I work for, it's a large company, which is owned by a Japanese, very large emporium, right? It's an infrastructure company that it's devoted to design, construct, and operate wastewater treatment plants. Can you imagine? I've been there for a while now. I can see, I don't know, thousands of contracts in a year. Everything it's about a contract. Everything has to do with a contract. That's why it's corporate law. Everything has to do whether we're going to purchase that machinery, whether we sold a project to a certain client, whether we're going to hire a new party. That involves a contract as well. Whether we're going to hire the services of a company who's going to go and clean the whole building. That's a contract as well. And then you have the day-to-day consultancy from your internal clients in the company saying, is this a contract? Because I sent an email to a guy saying yes to an offer that he sent me to provide, I don't know, teaching services or outsourcing services for the company. Well, we'll see about that later. But this is the type of problems, let's say, that you face in a day-to-day working in an environment such as a company. If you work for a law firm, this is the same type of consultation that you're going to get. We'll get to that. But there's no way society, a company, not even in a family, can work without contracts. In a family, we have contracts every day, isn't it? Do we sign it? No. Perhaps we should sometimes, right? But there's a lot of contracts every day. That's the way things work. Two special functions for a contract. And now, please, in this section, please think about an elaborate contract. A contract that is written down, it has a lot of provisions. Those type of contracts have this two special function. It provides a dispute resolution mechanism for exchanges, which means that allow parties to make plans for investments in reliance on the promises others have made to them. That's a lot of words just to say this. If I'm going to do an investment, for instance, and perhaps I'm going to buy a piece of land in Arteaga, because I want to grow wine, grapes and wine at some point in my life, right? So I'm going to purchase that. I'm pretty sure that I want to have a contract just to see that if something goes wrong with the deal, I have the reliance that my investment can be somehow safe, because I can go to court and enforce that if something goes wrong against my counterparty in that contract. The problem is with that dispute resolution mechanism, which is basically just to say that we try to draw in the provisions of a contract that if something goes wrong, we're going to go to the courts of Coahuila to have our dispute and to ventilate our controversy. I bought the piece of land and haven't received the title for it, for instance. Or not in the timing that I was supposed to get it out. The problem is that resolution mechanism is not really, how can I say this? In Mexico, I mean, it's not really comfortable sometimes for the parties. Or practical, of course. If an American company wants to come here and do business here in Mexico, sometimes they say, I don't want to be my dispute mechanism to be Mexican courts. I don't want to get involved in that. Why don't we have better a deal that involves dispute resolution in American courts, or even better, arbitration, right? Which is reason. So this is special function. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, especially for Mexican courts.
And you have to display on the contract, like all the rules, for example, which state you'll take dispute resolution, in what language you're going to resolve it, and when there are two states involved, right?
Yes, absolutely. You mean if you decide to go through arbitration? Not necessarily.
You have to, so,
ordinary courts.
okay, well, there is a question. It's only an arbitration or also in court? You can do that.
You can do both. I mean,
to choose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you go through courts, if you want to disputing that contract to resolve in ordinary courts, you have to decide which are the courts, which, by the way, is called venue, which are the right venue for that to be ventilated, right?
And the laws which you're going to
exactly, the laws are going to be applicable. Sometimes it gets so messy in terms of cherry picking. I want the law of New York to be governing this deal because there's an American company involved, for instance, and then I want the courts of Michoacan, right, to decide. I mean, that doesn't work at all, but it's possible. Why it is possible to do such a messy thing? Because there's always contract. It's about the will of the parties. Not what we've done. Will, as in Will Smith. I'm getting old. Will, it's W-I-L-L. That's the total freedom of the parties to contract everything that they want to the extent it's legal, right? Other than that,
or they can state that they can go to court, like they will decide any change of contract, right? I mean, they can decide not to go on a trial.
Yes, absolutely. They can decide. Again, they can decide whatever they like. For instance, they can go to arbitration, or before that, they can even go to a mediation process or even before that, and I've seen this in contracts, for instance, that are very elaborated for this type of infrastructure projects that I deal with, to say, let's have a technical mediation first. Let's bring Axel, which is the greatest engineer that there is in wastewater treatment plants, and whatever discussion that we might have, me being Atlatec, which is an MMI company, not my company, but my company that I work for, and my client, which is, for instance, Port Spain, the country of Trinidad and Tobago, right? Port Spain is the city. Those are my clients. So if there's a discussion in which, for instance, the plan that they asked me to do, it's this size, and they wanted this size, and then we have a controversy, and then we go to the contract and say, let's not go to court with this. This is so technical. Let's go to Axel first. Let's see what he has to say about this. And if there's still a controversy after he's involved and some party is dissatisfied, then we can jump into court or arbitration, or all of that. It's there. That's why sometimes contracts can get so long and so boring and so complex, because you want to over legislate. You want to try to capture all the possible hypotheses and scenarios that can come in the future for a contract that's going to last, for instance, 5 years. So, parentheses, lawyers, we really need a good imagination. Imagination from crisis. We always take things from the extreme because everything, in our view, is going to go wrong. That's why we're there, because business people, which are basically our clients usually for this type of deals, they want to do the deal. Is this good? To try to evaluate and assess scenarios always from the extreme? I don't know. Sometimes it depends. That's the usual response of a lawyer. Well, it depends. We'll get to that. But you're getting the picture now. What's the second function? Well, we said before, autonomy, the will. Contract law demonstrates that laws respect for these values by enforcing the agreements people make and by imposing obligations on people only when and to the extent they consent to assume those obligations. And this is even better. That's a lot of words. Even better, non-governmental intervention. Non-governmental intervention. We don't need to go to a government agency for you and me to enter into a contract in which I'm going to hire you to build the new Starbucks across the street. We might need some permits from government, but that's diverse. That's something else. How much you're going to charge me for that? How much time that's going to take? What are the terms and conditions more specific for that contract? Government. And that's great, because just imagine, and I mean, not always in time, in other countries has been that way. So imagine how inoperative that can be. Societies are completely blocked, right? But when parties have this type of freedom, society evolves. Questions so far? Very good. A little bit more about the same. Freedom to contract. I can contract whatever I like with whomever I like. But I also have the freedom not to contract, not to enter into a contract. That's my freedom as well. In the US, there is a lot of, you remember this, case law. In this sense, there have been a lot of court resolutions saying the party was not obligated to enter into a contract. This is a very extreme case. 1901, Purdy versus Eddingfield. Brief fact summary. Plaintiff, which is the party claiming something in that litigation. Plaintiff was in dire need of medical attention. Dire, very urgent, imminent. Plaintiff was in dire need of medical attention, and he called upon defendant, his family doctor, to help him. The family doctor was called in because somebody really required medical attention. For no reason, The doctor said, no, thank you. Not today. The plaintiff died. This did actually involve a pregnant woman, which was having trouble in labor. This is once again 1901. And the doctor was called in and he said, no, today, not today. That is a contract, isn't it? It's a one type of contract in which you said, well, doctor, come in and I will give you a consideration, tangible payment, and out of that, I'll get medical services. The doctor said no. And the woman died and the baby as well. I'm sorry to be so blunt at this hour on a Saturday morning, but that's what happened. Licensed doctors are not obligated to accept all patients who are in dire need of medical attention. There is no affirmative duty to be a good citizen and help others in peril, which is in danger, if you don't have cause or predicament. That's secondary. The first thing, the doctor was not, even in that case, even in that extreme case, the doctor is not obligated to enter into that contract. You see, that is the freedom of not contracting. Of course, there are moral issues and ethics, and okay, that's for next session. But for this one, this is just to clarify what does not obligated to contract is. All right, please. 4 elements. 4 contract elements, which are basically the same as those what we have here, isn't it, in Mexico? We need to have an agreement. And you will say, well, of course. Sometimes it's not that easy to understand whether parties are in agreement or something or not. If I offer you to sell this chair in this same brown chair in $10, which I'm gonna ship out and you're gonna receive next Tuesday. That's my offer. And I send you this by email. This is my offer. I'll send you, these are the terms, done. This is the price. And you say, okay, but I would like to have that chair in blue. Is there an agreement there? Not yet. But sometimes, and then again, this is the human psyche, it's involved here, because perhaps the other party said, well, I think he understood. Perhaps he read that I wanted in blue. And then you have on Tuesday the brown chair. And then the other party is going to say, but I sent you out my email, you didn't saw it. And this is the type of stupid things that happen, which fill out courts because people think that they're in agreement on something, and sometimes they're not. Multiply that same example for 500,000 chairs. Imagine the money that it's involved in. All because the parties were not detailed enough to provide the right terms and conditions to be sure that there's a contract in place. Business people, sometimes they skip this part because they don't know about this. That's why they need us. And we need to be very clear whether there is a contract or not. Yes? There has to be consideration as well. Again, it seems pretty obvious. We'll get to an example later on in which there's no consideration involved, and you're going to see about that. It has to be contractual capacity. The boys' wing is coming in. A little bit late, probably. Contractual capacity, same as in Mexico. You have to be of a certain age to enter into a contract. This might vary state by state. In the US, I mean, because contractual law, it's a state regulated matter. It's not federal. And then you have the lawful object. I will sell you. This is the typical example. I'm sorry. Once again, very blunt Saturday morning. I will sell you a ton of cocaine. Okay. For how much? $2 million. I don't know how much it's worth, but anyway. Do we have a contract? No. I think we have a contract. Right. The other thing is it enforceable in court? So it is a contract between narcos and whatnot, but it's not enforceable in court because there's no lawful object. When I saw this once, I was sitting there where you are many years ago, and the example was a real example. Teacher brought in a news article saying that in Laredo, a couple was selling a baby. This was a New York Times. It was national news at some point. They were negotiating with another party in the U.S. to sell their baby for 50,000 pesos, for instance. Yes, perhaps between them. Is it enforceable? Absolutely not. It's not a lawful deal. Right. And then again, sometimes these are very extreme examples. But sometimes it's a little bit different and a little bit complex to determine whether something is lawful or not. You really need to dig in, right? Whether there is consideration or not, whether you're in the face of an actual agreement that can be enforceable in court. And this is the questions that you're going to receive from your clients at some point. And you need to be very pristine, crystal clear on your answers without the legalese, legal jargon. Well, I think that was, you need to be very clear in matters to try to explain to your clients in business law terms what are the risks of that transaction, whether they actually have a contract or not, what can go wrong, etc. That's the talent. Two key elements: promise and contracting, commitment and future. Contracts always sees to the future. Tort law, which is civil responsibility, which is basically the law that deals with somebody getting injured after a car collision, after that looks to the past. That's law that has to be assessed to see how somebody can be sanctioned or penalized as a result of that injury. That it's tort, like in torta de jamón, tort law. Looks into the past. That's how the law is named, torts. Contract law, it's into the future, right? Grecia, you want to say something?
No,
No.
I was gonna ask how do you spell tort?
Tort, like in T-O-R-T, that's it, yeah. Then you have the promisor, which is the person making that promise, and then you have the promisee. Is that really important? No. So now you know. Definiteness, it's a very important doctrinal element. Evidence is consent. There is a natural assumption that a well-written, detailed contract, it's better evidence of intent to contract that one that leaves large areas uncovered. Imagine doing that same deal of the chairs. Again, multiplied by 1 million chairs, right? And perhaps the chairs, I need to build those chairs and I need to get the supplies from China first. I'm going to build them here and then I'm going to ship it out to Oklahoma, right? There's a lot of moving parts on that transaction. And in the way something can get messy, something might go wrong. So I need to be able to, first of all, capture that into a contract in a detailed way, just to be able to see that if something goes wrong, the consequence is going to be detailed there. If I determine that same, if I try to frame that same transaction orally and something goes wrong, that doesn't mean there's no contract in place. Perhaps we shook hands during a breakfast in Starbucks and we got into the chairs deal, and that's fine as well. But if something goes wrong and we need to go to court and I need to enforce that oral contract, I'm going to have a very hard time. And believe me, no one as lawyer is going to be able to really get the grasp out of it. Neither lawyer nor judge. So our commitment here is to be able, first of all, to capture the elements of the deal, to phrase them in a very detailed contract, even though there's no perfect contract, by the way. And just try to capture all of it. Why? Because if something goes wrong, then again, a third party, meaning judge, arbiter, etc., is going to be able to read the intent of the parties, what the parties wanted out of this. Otherwise, it's very good. Yes? Okay, please. Some of the reasons as to why it's better to have written contracts than oral contracts. The process of writing down, this is for your day-to-day lives. I mean, this is not only for contractual law session. The process of writing down the contract terms and signing the contract forces both parties or more to think and precise about the obligations that they are undertaking. Business people sometimes are crazy. Really, they are. And this is when we play the shrink card, because we're not only lawyers, we're shrinks as well, right? And they brought us these deals. They said, let me check, let's try to put it in writing, just bullet points, just to see if that works. And when you do that exercise, you might see immediately that it's not going to fly. That's not for you to decide, but that's for you to convey to your client. But you need to put it in writing. And when you do, you need to go out there and make some research about that deal, right? About the law, about other deals that have resembled the one that you have in place now before you. And then you might give an answer to it. But it's better to put it in writing. You don't have to write the whole thing, right, to the very last detail, but you can start with a very conceptual draft of things. And that accommodates ideas in your mind, not only your mind, your client's mind as well. That's the start. With an oral contract, it's too easy for both parties to say yes and then have second thoughts. Of course, when the terms of a contract are written down, the parties likely to create a more complete and thorough, which is detailed, agreement that they will buy oral. An oral agreement is likely to have gaps that will have to be resolved later when the relationship may have been deteriorated. And this happens every day. The problem with contracts is that they scare deals away. They scare clients away. That's what. Are you bringing the lawyer? Let's forget about it. That's the typical. We're good guys. We're good guys. We're just trying to put things together. The problem is that the typical narrative in our day-to-day society is that lawyers are there to destroy things, right? Lawyers are there to bring things to court. So you need to make your own pitch there, your sales pitch, and say, I'm a preventive lawyer. I'm here to frame your deal. Only that. Help out. The problem is that when you get to those provisions that talk about controversy and talk about dispute resolution and talk about we're going to choose Michoacán law and go to court to Monterrey, business people are like, I don't care about that at this moment. I just want to get my shares or sell my shares. Your talent, the second part of the session, your talent is to be able to very swiftly, in a very subtle manner, to try to convince it as to why in this very romantic part of the deal in which two parties are getting together for those shares to be sold, why it is important at this point to even have those very dark, controversial provisions in a contract. Some business people can understand that, some others. I've seen deals in my lifetime that they said, can we put those provisions relating to controversy in a separate document? Just to not have those provisions in my shares deal. because that can scare my client away. Of course we can. Is it recommendable? Of course not. Of course. No. I'll do whatever you like. These are my recommendations. It's not something I would recommend. Good so far? Any questions from the remote audience? No? We're good.
When you're writing a contract, maybe you can have clear what the parties may agree on, but not what they don't agree on, which is the hardest part.
Oh, yes.
Like if you change your mind, you don't know if they would agree or they won't.
Yes.
So that I guess that's why we have to present, like, okay, if this doesn't work, what would you agree on?
Exactly.
And it's impossible to have all the plan A, B, C, and F.
All scenarios. That's why there's no perfect contract. And at some point, you need to reach that definitiveness part of the deal, because otherwise it can stretch out to many scenarios. You over legislate in a contract.
For example, when COVID started,
Mhm.
I was working in a company and we had a very complete contract, and we knew if they would agree on something, but then COVID changed everything. We didn't know if they would agree on selling half of the product, and maybe we would pay them 4 months later, or if they would maybe. We didn't know if they would prefer not to get the money and not selling the product.
Yes.
Because we didn't know if they produce the product.
Right.
In some cases,
Perhaps not even them. They knew about if they were able to perform.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But the thing is, in the contract, we have the
Force majeure provision.
Exactly. But that changed everything because all the contracts you can throw it to the trash can,
Right.
but only with that, we didn't know what to do.
And they called you, is it?
No, I mean, I mean, we have the same contract. It's not that I say that I had to do a specific contract for specific service.
Right.
But we didn't know if all the companies would agree on the same thing.
Right.
We had to call and check, and they didn't know either. So that's the hardest part.
You brought a very interesting point there. Contracts in the US and in Mexico as well. Again, you try to capture to the fullest extent the deal and what could happen in the future, as we just said. If you missed something, those gaps that were not included there as a result of perhaps no one brought it in, no one thought about it, perhaps you run out of time and the parties really needed to execute the contract today. There's no more time to negotiate and draft additional provisions. Something is not there. You can always go and check the law. The law fills those gaps in. The problem is that sometimes the law has its own gaps. And this is what things get messier. And then you need to go to the jurisprudence, as the name of this part of the university is. In the US, case law. In Mexico, jurisprudence, isn't it? You need to see how courts have resolved those gaps that are not included, not even in your deal, not even in the law, not even in the regulations of the law, regulations. That's part of the job. You need to get something from somewhere. COVID brought this type of discussions. Force majeure, acts of God, and force majeure. Have you heard about those? Caso fortuito y fuerza mayor. In the US, ironically, those two provisions, caso fortuito, fuerza mayor, you know the definition between those two, right? It's let me just go real quick. This is for the Mexican part. This is an exception for both parties. Let me rephrase that. it's a consequence, it's an event whose consequence release both parties from their obligations before that contract, right? Both. It could be something that was created as a result of a riot or other human event, human involved event, a riot, a devaluation, for instance, something that was humanly created. That's force majeure. What is it? That's an international standard. Caso fortuito, which is fortuitous case, but not understood as such in the US. It's more like an act of God, very religious concept. It's something that it's also is going to release the parties from their obligations to the contract. For instance, not to create or manufacture those chairs. You're released from that obligation in our contract, and I'm also released from paying for those chairs once manufactured, as a result of a big hurricane, a flood, a pandemic, right? That's what happened exactly a little bit more than a year. As Grecia said, all the world went crazy about this, looking immediately to the force majeure or acts of God provisions in the contract. What does that say? No one cares in those provisions. Nothing really happens, right? There's a lot of contracts that go perfectly well, and people, again, the business people, the last thing that they want to know when they're negotiating in that romantic phase of the negotiation is to hear about some flooding that can come in the future. Who cares? Or some pandemic that's not going to happen in 100 years. Won't happen. Now, and it started out. Some deals going to court, some others into a negotiation. Yes.
And would you recommend from now on to stipulate on a contract about self-adopting pandemic?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Now it's like you have to have this clause. Right?
I'm even, I should not be happy about the pandemic, absolutely not. But now business people get it, right? It's a great example. See, do you see what can happen? Did you expect that in your chair deal? You see why I'm trying to frame all these possible situations in the future. You see what I wanted now. It's a great platform. But definitely, yes.
So how do you, I mean, I wouldn't be able to do a clause for that specific area.
I'm sure you can.
No.
Yes, you can.
Yes, I guess, I can try, but
You can
how
try.
can you?
It's all a matter of drafting. It's a combination of things. You can start your own drafting, and you can go see other examples as well, and then you create your own version.
Maybe we can check something.
Oh yes, there is plenty. I'm going to comment after your question. You wanted to say something, sorry.
Yeah, after all these important cases,
Uh-huh.
I guess the law already changed. We are already using like
Not that I know of.
for the pandemic or something.
What, again, contract law varies state by state. I cannot assure you
It is by state by state.
in the US. No.
Because it was a law.
Yes, but then again, if you have a controversy in your contract, and you need to go to court as a result of a dispute, you'll have to go to state court for that. Your question is very good. Whether the law changed, I'm not sure whether there is new enacted law from Congress, as we saw last session. But what I'm sure about is that there should be a lot of new case law on the matter, meaning new decisions coming from different courts in regards to pandemic. I'm pretty sure about it. Because a lot of people with the wrong deals as a result of COVID, I'm sure they visited court. And by now, courts already have decided what to do in a certain case, right? Case law has been created, pretty sure. So there is new law, yes, not coming from Congress, coming from courts, right? Which, as we saw last session, is basically the same, right? I mean, there's a hierarchy there, but it's enforceable.
What I've seen in Mexico, it's not really related to contract.
Uh-huh.
But if you go, for example, you go to Registro Público de la Propiedad.
Public registry of property and commerce. Yes, yes. I think that's my 101 session, right, in translation.
Okay. And you ask them, like, how long is this going to take? They'll tell you 12 months out of pandemic.
After pandemic is done.
Out of,
Uh-huh.
or,
Following pandemic.
Exactly. Which, I mean,
I know.
is easier for them.
Absolutely. The world slowed down all of a sudden from one day to the other. So we'll get it back. Anyway. The second, the bullet there, using words in terms of drafting. Using words is very much like driving a car. If it's not done carefully, someone can be injured, right? That's why you need to read a lot. You need to expand the universe of your words that you have here. Otherwise, you cannot be able to draft any contract when the time comes in to do it. You see what I'm saying? There is no way that if your mind is not fully accommodated with words, especially legal oriented words, it's going to be almost impossible for you to draft the right contract. You need to expand the pool of your lexicon, right? Yes?
So you have to expand your language so you can be more specific.
Absolutely. By the way, this is my daughter. Yes. There's no way, again, if you want to produce, for instance, this is like a thumb rule. I believe this was Churchill's. Winston Churchill's quote saying, if you want to produce a one-piece speech, single page, you need to read 3 books. You need to expand it and then produce a very compact piece of speech cases if he was prime minister. This is the same for contracts. But everything is there. You need to go and check the law, other contracts, legal doctrine. What else? And then you can call Fabiana about this as well, and some other teachers. All the tools are there. You're never alone. You have the internet, which is endless. Right? It's just a matter of going to the right places. It's always there. But even when you have those tools, you need to really know how to exercise them. And this is when your own universe of words have to be expanded throughout reading. There's no other way. Reading, 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 reading.
It also because it's like
To twitch the words, to tweak it. Well, that's another thing. Yes, I mean,
like we need to know how to take advantage.
absolutely. That's when you began to control, right, the narrative or some of a certain situation. It could be a contract, litigation, etc. That's why you can be on the plaintiff side, we're claiming for something throughout a lawsuit, or in the defendant side, saying, I'm going to defend this. The same case, but with your smartness as lawyers, you can be in that way or in this way. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes? All right, please. Oh, no, sorry. So, does a contract have to be in writing to be enforceable? No, doesn't have to be. Is it better if it's in writing? Yes. To the extent that the deal gets more complex, more structured, it's very much suggestible that it's in writing. Right? Once again, this is very easy to say today. For your clients, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like, why do we need that 10-page document? Right? The deal is about to start. This is another thing, and we'll get to that in the second block. Sometimes you're asked to start a contract from scratch, and that's great. But sometimes the deal already started out. Sometimes you're asked to finish that contract. Sometimes you're involved when the parties already have a dispute. Sometimes we're involved not even in the scratch, but sometimes both parties come in. We have this big idea, the next Amazon idea. But we don't know how to document. We don't know how to start. Fine. A deal done on a handshake. Do you do X for me and I'll pay you Y? Let's see this contract. It's a legally enforceable agreement involving exchange of promises. Those contracts are enforceable whether they're oral or written. Once again, always it's better to have a written document, written contract. Or you can record it. I'm sorry?
It is easier to evidence, like to present as evidence of contracts.
Absolutely.
And if there are witnesses or something to report out,
Even then,
there's not always.
perhaps the witness doesn't want to appear before court. Says, well, we were there. I don't want to get involved in this. Witness myself. Then you have some way to evidence and to be able to scroll away. A contract is formed when one party, the offeror or the promisor, we saw before, makes an offer which is accepted by the other party, which is called the offeree. An offer, a proposal to form a contract can be as simple as the words, I'll wash your car for $5. And acceptance can be, the offeree's assent to the terms of the offer can be as simple as, you got a deal. Wash your car for $5. That's the offer. Offeree might say, you got a deal. Or you might just be like, but yes. Apparently. Okay. Have yourself a deal. Yes. There are some types of contracts. I don't know, we have something like later on in this that cannot be agreed as that, but requires formality. This is in the Mexico as well. In the US, there is a piece of legislation that it's called the Statute of Frauds, which is basically to avoid frauds, which details which type of contract require certain formalities to be enforceable. For instance, the purchase of sale of land requires a contract to be written down. A deal that exceeds, I believe, $500, perhaps that amount has already been incremented, requires a written agreement. Marriage requires a written agreement. When I got married some years ago in Mexico, I'm only married in Mexico, by the way. Are you married in the US? When I got married, in the civil part of marriage, which is the actual civil contract, they asked me, do you take not with this face, though. And the officer, which is not a judge, by the way, the officer there said, no. You need to spell it out, my friend. You don't want only consent by conduct. You need to speak. Can you speak? Yes, I can. Well, say yes or no. Yes. Okay, that's it. And then you sign it. Some contracts cannot be enforceable when conduct it's expressed to convey consent. It requires more than that. It requires certain formalities to be enforceable. Otherwise, there's no contract. Okay. When an offer has been made, no contract is formed until the offeree accepts the offer. When you make an offer, never assume that the offeree will accept the offer. Contractual liability is based on consent. Once again, we go back to that sample in which said, okay, you need those 5 chairs in brown at that price. That's my offer. And you said, yes, but in blue. There's no contract there. If there's no counter proposal, the blue part, then we have a contract. I have an offer and I have an acceptance. A plain acceptance without new or different terms to my offer. Yes, that is a contract. Okay. I'm not going to get into the other part, which is a little bit more long. Can you go to the next, please?
So in that case, the owner has to say yes in blue. Yes, it will be in blue. They'll have to tell me.
My example was I can be able to provide these chairs, 5 chairs by Tuesday in brown. If you're going to get those, if you're my client, I'm the supplier. If you say yes, that's a plain consent. If you say yes, but in blue, no contract. Even though she answered me,
Yes, the offer tells you that as an option about the blue.
oh, okay. Okay, that's adding some ingredients to the example. But yes, I mean, perhaps I have a choice, right? If the proposal, as being me being the supplier, it's I can get you 5 chairs by Tuesday. You pick the color. Love me. You don't have to tell me what color is, or well, just tell me, or call the secretary and she'll take the color, and that's it. Whatever color you choose, we'll have a contract, right? But if my proposal was designed just to say brown, and the counter offer said yes, but in blue, there's no contract, right? It all depends what's the pitch. And then again, that's a great example. Thank you. But this is the type of things that come to your desk as, but from clients. I mean, like, do we have a contract? Well, let me understand. What was the offer? What exactly? Was it brown? Was it blue? Was it whatever color the client wanted? What is it? Just to try to understand where we're standing. But going to the very, let's say, plain example of 5 chairs by Tuesday in brown, if there's no repeal or rejection from the client, we have a contract there. If there is even the slightest change in the terms and conditions of the contract, it's not in place. I'm not saying that deal might end up in court. Most of them, they don't end up in court or litigation. Most of them is just like what I brought the brown chairs, but I send an email and a reimbursement out of it. I'll send the chairs back to the warehouse and right? And they try to negotiate something to arrange and to settle whatever was not captured. But all of those things can be prevented if a contract is in place. Somebody told me once when I was trying to say this in the company. So he told me this guy was the head of procurement department, the guy that purchases everything, right? And he has his own team. And he told me, well, what I'm learning, what you're saying now, lawyer, is that you want one lawyer for one of my guys in my team, just to be sure that every other deal that they do, it's in the right place. He was making fun. So no, of course, this is not going to be a company full of lawyers, right? 2 or 3 is more than enough. What I need you is to understand the commitments we're doing on behalf of a company that is not yours, by the way. But not trying, I mean, by skipping the very easy to understand concept of when a contract is in place or not. Just put attention, pay some attention to it, and that's it. I mean, I don't want a guy sitting by a lawyer sitting by your side and on every deal. That's impossible. It's unoperative. But it's only a matter of really understanding, for you to convey and for them to understand when a deal is in place. Right? When thing goes bad, I remember studying an article years ago about transactional costs. It's very interesting. It has to do with business law as well, and contractual law, of course. Transactional costs. How much a deal it's worth when it considers all those possibilities that can happen in the future, even ending up in court. All of that has to be in the price of the deal. I know it's a little bit philosophical, but there's a lot of doctrine, legal doctrine, which involves transactional costs. If I'm required to enter into a contract that perhaps is going to end up in Mexican court, that's a very high transactional cost because I cannot control it. Mexican courts doesn't have the best standing, let's say, in the international business arena. So how can I be sure of the liability that I may have in terms of transactional cost? How can I control it? Let's go to arbitration, and that can reduce my liability. I know, again, it's more philosophical, but there's much about it. Transactional costs. Take a note. You can consider your own, or perhaps in that section next year. Except for the simplest deals, sorry. There, thank you. It generally takes more than one round of negotiations to form a contract. The offeree responds to the initial offer with a counteroffer, W chair. Counteroffer is an offer made by the offeree on the same subject matter as the original offer, but proposing a different bargain than the original offer. All of that, it's the brown chair and the blue chair. Counteroffer. Perhaps not the color. I'll get those chairs to you by Tuesday, $100 each. Okay, but I can only pay 80 each. We have a contract. But we don't. And people sometimes think like, I told him yes, but in a lesser price. So I won. No, you don't have a contract. You're just creating trouble here. Just be sure, if you're not willing to pay $100 for it, just say it and go to the next supplier. But I said before, business people sometimes they try to quick the deals. Black and white. Black and white. Next.
What's an outright?
Can you go back, please? Outright rejection is an open rejection, a clear rejection of the original offer. A counter offer, like an outright rejection, like $80 instead of 100, terminates the offeree's legal power. Consideration, we said before, something of legal value given in exchange for a promise, it must be given before a contract can exist. Most common types of consideration, contraprestación. Money, tangible payment, exempli gratia, money or property. Performance of an act, exempli gratia, providing legal services. That's a type of consideration, isn't it? According to traditional legal doctrine, if one party makes a promise and the other party offers nothing in exchange for that promise, the promise is unenforceable. Such a promise is known as gratuitous promise, which are unenforceable for lack of consideration. This is the example that I told you before. John told Sam, when I buy a new car, This can work also as father and daughter example. When I buy a new car, I'll give you my truck. Father tells daughter, John bought a new car, but did not give Sam the truck. John promised to give Sam the truck based on an enforceable gratuitous promise. Sam gave nothing to John in return. This was a promise coming from one party to the other. The other party was showing nothing for it. This is just a promise from me to you. Ethically, morally, that can work. You told me that you're gonna give me your old truck when you get a new car. You just got the new car and haven't received the old truck. Can that person go to court for that? No. There's no consideration. Only one party was going to get something out of this deal. The guy that was going to receive the old truck. What was the other party going to receive? Nothing. Gratuitous promise. There's plenty of examples. Mostly in connection to family. When the uncle told you, I'm gonna give you gold coins when you get 18. I'm 18 now, don't forget it. I never told you that. Can you go to court? No? Next, please. Oh, sorry. I thought that yeah. Corporations have the power to enter into contracts. Title is who can enter into a contract? The first item, it's basically people that has the capacity for it. A legal capacity, as in Mexico. I'm not gonna go into that. I'm more interested in this part. Corporations have the power to enter into contracts. Companies, entities. They make contracts for the acts of their agents, officers, and employees. Whether a particular employee has the power to bind the corporation to a contract is determined by an area of law called agency law or corporate law. Los poderes. Have you seen one of those? Power of attorney? Right? In the US, work the same way. They don't have the exact same 4 types of powers of attorney that we have here in Mexico to enter into acts of management, actos de administración, to go into litigation, pleitos y cobranzas, to go into securities, cambiario, or ownership acts, acting as owner, dominion. In the US, it works a little bit different. They go basically in a basket of authority, the companies, by saying you can enter access into matters that can go from $0 to $5 million. All that it's involved there, you can go into. You can act on behalf of the company by powers of attorney. Or if there's a special deal, I'm gonna best into you this power of attorney. POAs are called powers of attorney. Right?
So
sure.
They manage it's like all together, all the powers of attorney, they'll go together always, or they're managed separately. As here in Mexico, each power needs to
I've seen both.
Specifically given.
For instance, in large banks, I've seen that they have these big baskets by saying all of these officers are going to be entitled to go into contracts from a certain value, right? And that's it. And then at the same time, if they want to enter into a more out of the day-to-day business operation of that bank, for instance, buying a new building, which is not the core business of a bank, they will give you a special power of attorney for that. That's what we have here in Mexico as well. Right?
Here in Mexico, like each power of attorney needs to be given specifically to.
Well, that would be a special power of attorney in Mexico, but if you have like a general power of attorney, poder general para pleitos y cobranzas, that's whatever is written in the power of attorney you can do without limitation. But to answer your question, I've seen both. I've seen large companies having, as I said before, groups of people in power who vested with powers attributed to X and Y, and some other, as I said before, out of the core business transactions are vested specially. And they're like one paragraph saying, Axel, it's entitled to enter on behalf of Citibank to purchase that piece of land. That's it. And they don't need to go to a notary public. And it's so simple. We complicate matters a lot. Okay. 10 minutes. All right. Any questions from our remote crowd? No, we're good. Yes.
So talking about the contracts, you're saying that the contracts in a way like scare the client away, right?
Sometimes.
So is it better to hide that preventions or if it's like necessary?
No. It's never recommendable to hide anything. Never. You need to really explain to your client the benefits of having even uncomfortable provisions to that contract at the romantic phase of the deal. And I mean romance is, put it this other way. You're dating a guy, right? You started out 2 weeks ago. Things are running good. By the way, you're not allowed to do that. But really, things are running smoothly. And then at the 2-week relationship, you say, well, when we marry, we might, if we divorce, after we get married, if we divorce, we'll get the kids, I'll get the house. Hey, we just started out, right? We don't need to jump into that. You're scaring me away. Same happens with the deals. 2 business parties, right, are discussing the possibility of opening and the new Starbucks across the street. One owns the land, the other owns the franchise. You're getting together. And they call you, and you begin to, after you frame the deal, you began to say, well, if this goes wrong, we're going to have to go to arbitration to New York. So I don't want to hear about that. I just want to see the coffee shop open as soon as possible because I already have invested. And this is why sometimes clients are scared away. A lawyer's talent has to be to explain in a very subtle manner that those provisions have to be there because it's better for them. It's beneficial for them because at some point something might go wrong, and they would like to have in that possibility something to look up to, somewhere to look up to. Perhaps there's already a mechanism to resolve problems in a more automatic way instead of going to court. And why go to court? Because perhaps the parties wanted to skip that part, or because you as lawyer hit that part, which is not recommendable. You need to brought up to light things and say this might happen. My suggestion to you, as your legal consultant, is to put this in right. Good. 10 minutes. Thanks. All right.
Oigan, allá afuera hay cafecito y sándwiches.
Okay, so till this point, we have been somehow talking about contract creation, the formation of contract. I want to devote some time to say 30 minutes, not much more than that. So we can go into the tips section. What happens when the deal goes wrong? Right. And just to, let's say, go a little bit through the terminology that is used when that situation happens. So how much does someone have to pay for not keeping a promise? We said before, which is a breach of contract, the default of a contract. What happens in that situation? Doesn't matter whether it was an oral contract, it's a written contract, a contract. It's the breach of a contract, it's the violation of a contractual obligation. One may breach a contract by repudiating a promise, failing to perform a promise, or interfering with another party performance, which is a little more of the Greek situation, a little more special. If a person, someone, that's something wrong there, does not do what she has promised to do, that person is in a breach of contract. What's the consequence of that? The immediate consequence of that is that the other party is off the hook as well. The other party, if one party failed to comply, the other party can fail to comply as well. We have that in Mexico as well, isn't it? La excepción del contrato no cumplido. Aha. The other party is off the hook, right? Doesn't require to comply as well. For instance, if I was supposed to get those chairs and I don't get those chairs, I'm not obligated to pay for those chairs as well. The non-breaching party is entitled to legal remedy for that breach. Remember we said before, relief or remedy, which are basically synonyms. Please. This is, let's say, a very simple chart about contract performance. The type of performance, meaning whether the parties actually complied with those terms and conditions. We interpret that as performance. If there's a complete performance from the parties, meaning I manufacture the chairs, I supply those chairs, the other party pay for those chairs, complete performance, the contract is discharged. I was hired to build that Starbucks, I was paid for it, I built it in time and in accordance with the contract that we entered into, contract is discharged. There is perhaps some other, which is substantial performance. I basically complied with everything that was in that contract. I was the architect and the contractor for that Starbucks. I was supposed to complete the works by October the 1st, but I ended up in November 1st, a month late. But everything went, other than that, everything went well. Substantial performance. Is there a breach? Well, yes, because we set up there a program, right, and a schedule for those works to be performed. Whether the other party is entitled to some relief, that means the not breaching party, me being the owner of the land in which that Starbucks is going to be built. If I'm entitled for some sort of remedy as a result of that, those works ended up being late one month. Absolutely. Why do you think I need a relief? Only because the contract says so? Why? Why do you think that lateness in time for completing those works affect me as the owner or as the hiring party for that new Starbucks? Any idea? Yes? That could be one. What about in terms of money? Why? Because you're not selling coffees. You were supposed to start selling coffees by October 1st, and it's October 31, Halloween, and you haven't sold one. That is money. So you need to be able to recover that through what it's called damages, which, by the way, it's the literal translation of daños, right? We usually talked about daños y perjuicios. It's damages, loss of profit. It's not the same though. In the US, usually damages involve the loss of profit as well. It's a more ample concept. Damages involve a lot of things. There are different types of damages. We're going to see in a minute. An inferior performance, meaning this guy was not even able to start the works, even though we had a contract. He told me he was going to start by June the 1st, and it's August, and nothing has happened because X and Y. Inferior performance, material breach, substantial breach, and The non-breaching party, me, which was the one that I entrusted the works, can either resign the contract, which is the translation for rescission, which is termination for failure to comply. Contract rescission. And I can ask for the specific performance. I can say, I want my Starbucks till the end. I don't want to resign the contract. I want you to complete those works as we contracted, specific performance. Or I can request damages as relief for that, because that didn't happen. If this was a real scenario, a typical business party might say, I don't want you anymore here. I want you out of the picture. I don't want the specific performance, because I know that this is going to end up wrong. So what I want from you is money, right? Money to pay for what you didn't were able to deliver in time and in accordance to our contract. I want money. How much money? We'll get to that. You see, damages in the US, in terms of conceptual legalese, damages is money. Period. All right? Please.
So you're always able to choose either you want the
Specific performance? Yes.
as the person damaged, you can choose.
Yes. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. The only thing is that, once again, from a very pragmatical perspective, if that guy already went wrong and couldn't deliver in time, why would you like for that guy to do that specific performance? You don't want to obligate that guy because you already know that person is not going to deliver, or that company is going to fail to comply once again. But how about, and this is what this slide is about, how about you're entrusting an artwork, right? What if Axel, which loves art, talks to a local artist and said, I want a painting for my new living room in my duplex apartment, right? Single guy, a lot of money. And he talks to the local artist and he wants a 2x2 painting. And he wanted by Christmas because he's going to receive his family there and he wants to show off. Isn't it? Excellent. And it's February, and Axel has not been able to receive the painting, right? The artwork. And the artist is nowhere to be found. And at the end, he locates the artist and said, I already pay you some money. I already pay you some down payment. I want the specific performance. Why? Because you're an artist and there's no other artist like you. And I want your artwork in my living room. Same example. I buy you a 1978 Ford car, which was driven by Elvis Presley. I want that car. I don't want the money back. I want the car. You need to provide a specific performance. I'm not interested in damages money as relief. I want that product, or I want that specific service. And the court, sorry, the court, it's entitled to obligate the artist, the owner of the Elvis Presley car, to produce. Is it possible? It is not possible. Is it easy? I'm sorry. It's not easy, right? To really obligate somebody to do that specific performance. If I go back to the art example, perhaps the artist is going to be so mad that he went to court and he doesn't like that sort of stuff, that he produces an artwork that at the end I don't like. It has a lot of implications there in terms of specific performance. That's why always the money option is better. It all depends on the situation. You want to say something?
I want to ask, like, if you ask, for example, the example you made, right? The Elvis Presley car.
Sure.
It doesn't matter if the car is either like expensive, more expensive than that, or if they own it. Doesn't matter. You can always ask for it.
I can always ask for the car.
I mean, like, If they own one.
Uh-huh.
or-
They owe me the car. I already paid for it.
Yeah, but anyway, you can ask
Mhm.
to pay, they pay more than.
Your question is whether I'm gonna, in my request of damages, if I forget about its specific performance, and say, okay, I'm gonna forget about the car, but you owe me money. I'm not gonna ask for the same amount that I already paid. I'm gonna ask for double or triple.
What is that like, specific performance? What if the performance is more expensive than they charge?
That's, no. That's because we had a deal. I mean, let me try to understand your example. It's whether, if we agreed on $1 million for that car, and then the other party says, the owner of the car says, I cannot sell you on $1 million, even though we agreed yesterday. Because now it's 1.2. Is that your example?
If they don't give you the thing you ask,
Uh-huh.
they are causing damages.
Oh, yes.
So you say, okay, don't give the car, but give me like an artwork. What if the artwork is more expensive than the car?
Great question. I understand. If there is substitution thing that can replace the original deal, if it's more expensive, that's something, that's a new deal, basically. If that's something acceptable to me as the injured party, as the non-reaching party of the deal, if that's acceptable to me as payment of damages, that's fine, even if it's expensive. But if the art dealer is willing to put that as a remedy for me, and I accept it, we have a settlement out of our controversy. There's no need to continue the fight. Yes? It's just a matter of people negotiating things weighed out of dispute. That's great. But I can, if that's not the case, and that was my next example, if that's not the case, and I decide not to take the specific performance in the car situation, I would like for damages to be produced then as relief for me. I'm going to ask for much more. Much more. And this is when things get a little bit messier as well. And this is where lawyers, litigants come in. Because they need to produce sufficient evidence before court as to say, if my client paid $1 million for that car, and this Presley car, now he's requesting proof. Why is that? Well, because perhaps there's no other car like that. Or because the only other car that exists that Elvis Presley drove, it's in Germany, and it's going to take a lot of money to bring it in to the US, for instance. And the difference between that and my time and my effort to get what I wanted in the first place that you cannot produce, that is the damage, right? And you need to pay for that. Good? It's there, right? Why? The logic, the rationale, it's, we didn't need the lawyers. We had an agreement. Because of your fault, now we need to have the lawyers in. So you need to pay for it. You created the problem, right? Yes.
So if you if you don't have a contract, you can't take that case to court.
Yes, you can.
There's no evidence.
Yes, there could be. It doesn't have to be, as we said before, an oral contract is a contract as well. Perhaps it was just an email saying, could you please start, we agreed on price, please start the artwork. And there's an email, and the other guy said, okay, I will. That's a contract like that. And that's sufficient evidence to take to court. Is that a perfect contract? It is a contract. It is enforceable, yes. Is that recommendable? No. It would be better for court to digest a contract more elaborately to understand the terms and conditions of that specific transaction, right? Even though it's an artwork. But this is, again, this is when subtle things come in, like, well, the painter is my friend. I don't want to push this guy in the contract. We're friends. And then friendship comes in the middle, and then things get complicated, and
Or what if the person agrees to any, like, to the other person?
well, there's no contract.
No, but like, like, not saying yes, like, not saying no.
There's no contract there as well.
So then you can take it.
No.
for other.
In that case, it would be very different. Very different. There was an offer, but there was not an acceptance for that contract. So the basic elements of the transaction. You can chase it though. I mean, you can take it to court, and perhaps some judge can see some grounds for it, but it's not that easy. Okay. We said money damages as a substitute for the promised performance, not the actual performance itself on the second bullet. When a promise is broken, the non-breaching party's expectation is the usual measure of contract damages. Can you go to the next, please? This is a great case, a pumpkin case. So, a farmer agrees to sell a truckload of pumpkins to the owner of a stand for $100. A pumpkin stand. It's a little bit difficult to pronounce pumpkins. When the farmer fails to deliver the pumpkins, the stand owner buys a substitute truckload from another farmer for $120. The owner expected to have paid $100 to receive a truckload of pumpkins, so requiring the breaching partner to pay $20 in damages would substitute pumpkins for $100 or less. Are we good? If the farmer buys substitute pumpkins for $100 or less, the farmer owes nothing, right? Because the stand owner was able to get pumpkins for the same price he was originally about to get. Even better, he got it cheaper. If that is the case, and there's evidence in that situation, there's no damages to be paid from the farmer, from the breaching farmer. If the farmer buys substitute pumpkins for $100 or less, the farmer owes nothing, because the owner is in a good position as if the farmer's promise had been performed even without the payment of damages. Now, once again, this is a very hypothetical situation in which all of the evidence is in place. Now, if some deal goes wrong, you always try to accommodate the facts to get damages out of it, right? Because you were expecting to have that truckload of pumpkins, and even though you got it cheaper in some other place, you want to somehow frame the case to get something out of the failing situation in which they put you in the first place. Understand it once again. Right. But in theory, in that case, in which the farmer, in which the stand owner could get the same product from a lesser price, for a lesser price, there's no damages to be paid, in theory. All right? Next, please. Similar, if the stand owner refuses to take the pumpkins and the farmer resells them for $90, this is the farmer complies in time and in product, right? He has the pumpkins, the truckload is ready there in the stand. And the stand owner said, no, I don't want it. I don't want it. He's breaching the contract, isn't it? He was supposed to accept the product. If the stand owner refuses to take the pumpkins and the farmer resells them for $90, the owner should pay $10 to put the farmer where he had been if the promise had been performed. Because the farmer was expecting to get $100 out of $100. Stand owner wouldn't get them. He went out and sold them for a lesser price. The damages that can be requested from the farmer to the stand owner, $10. This is, again,
very black and white, very theoretical example, but this is how damage, this is the rationale, conceptually rationale of the damages can be collected as remedy in court. If the farmer resells for 100 or more, which was the original price, once again, the landowner owes nothing. There's no damages. He got the same price that he was originally going to get from the landowner, right? In both examples above, none of the parties is bound to look for a compensatory transaction to collect damages. This is very important. In both cases that we just saw, from the breaching perspective of the farmer, or from the breaching perspective of the landowner, we're saying that both of them had to go to a different place, either to sell the products or to buy the products, right, for a different price. The concept that I want to convey with that paragraph there is that they don't have to do that. They don't have to go and actually sell the product to somebody else or purchase the product from somebody else and then go to court and collect damages. They'll have to create just a case to say, if I, in a certain expectation, would have sell this in the market, I'm pretty sure my price, the price that I was going to get as a result of that, was going to be cheaper than the original price I was. That is called expectation of performance. It's a doctrine as well. Let me rephrase this. There's no need for the parties, for a breaching party to say, my damages are 10 because I wanted to sell in 100, but I couldn't, and that deal went wrong. I went to another deal, it was 90, so my damages are 10. This, walking out to a different deal, is not necessary. It's just a matter of creating a case in which, in a certain circumstance, in my lawsuit, I need to post that for a judge to say, you're right. Why? Because the pumpkins market right now, it's 90 or 80 or 75. So I have the grounds, the arguments to go and collect damages as a result of the original failing. Yes? This means that there is some benefit for the non-breaching party, for the party that complied, because it basically, a judge will have to understand and be convinced, of course, that if the original deal went wrong, some other deal could happen, and it could be even wrong, more wrong than the original one. And that's why the difference between those two deals, the one that actually failed and the other imaginary deal, results in damages that can collect. Right? That is the rationale of damages. Then you add expenses and whatnot. You can really create a snowball of damages, especially if you feel injured or damaged as a result of the failing party in your contract. This is what you do. Please. Just a very, let's keep this one. This is actually language in the contract. Let's go through it. An actual provision of damages in a contract. This is what perhaps you're going to read. This is a distribution contract. Distributor hereby agrees to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless owner against any liability, losses, damages, or costs, including legal costs, incurred or suffered by owner as a result of any breach, negligent act, or omission, willful default on the part of the distributor or its representatives arising either directly or indirectly from the performance or non-performance by distributor or any of its representatives of any obligation under this agreement. This is hell, isn't it, to read? This is the actual indemnity clause that you might find in any certain contract relating to damages. Meaning, if you create, as a result of breaching this contract, a damage against me, you need to indemnify. This is something that we can even agree in the language of the contract. We don't have to go to court. We might go to court, but we can, if there's something wrong, we can go and looked into the contract and we already have a provision that frames the situation, a failing situation that we're seeing there. Yes? All right. Next, please. Very good. The types of damages. Types of damages. Compensatory damages, consequential damages. We have the same here as well. First, please, in Mexico. Compensatory damages. It's a award of money intended to compensate a non-reaching party for the loss of the bargain. In the pumpkin case, right, the farmer that couldn't comply, didn't comply with the contract, the farmer failed to comply, the landowner is going to look for compensatory damages. Meaning, I wanted to sell $100 those pumpkins. I could only sell them in $80. I would like for $20 difference as compensatory damages to compensate the gap between the original deal and the deal that could happen. Places the non-reaching party in the same position as if the contract had been fully performed by restoring the benefit of the bargain. It's just to say, I was expecting 100, put me in that place. I was expecting 100, I got nothing. And I'm sure if I sell it otherwise, I could only get 70. Please compensate for that. $30 for damages. Another type, and these are very dangerous. Consequential damages. Foreseeable damages that arise from circumstances outside the contract. Oh my God, what is this? To be liable for these damages, the breaching party must know or have reason to know that the breach will cause special damages. Listen. Again, the company that I worked for once had a contract with General Motors here in Palm San Juan to make some process in the industrial water, which was going to, the purpose of that water after being processed was to be cooled down for certain machinery to work for and manufacture the process, right? The contract that we entered into was an American contract, an American government contract, an American law government contract. We had a consequential damage clause. And everyone was like, what is that? This was many years ago. Consequential damages. Then we talked with General Motors just to try to understand after we did our research. I remember having this conversation with the lawyer. Said, so you're telling me if I fail to comply with my commitment to cool that water, that was basically just the frame of my obligation. That means that if I fail to comply, you're saying that the consequence of my failure is going to produce that the plant stops for 1 day or 2 days or 3 days. And the damages that you want to collect from me as a supplier of that water, it's all that you lost as a result of that plant stopping. This is how they usually go. No way. No way. I mean, I'm collecting a service of 1 million pesos monthly, let's say, for my service. And you're saying me that I should be bound or obligated to pay for a consequential damage that I cannot see right now. I cannot control what is going to happen if for some reason I cannot give you the water. Perhaps it's going to be my fault, but I cannot be the party to be blamed if General Motors operation stops for 1 day and to be able and to pay for whatever those cars you didn't sell. It's out of proportion. So whenever you see a consequential damage clause in a contract that you enter, you need to put a cap on it or just eliminate it, because otherwise your client can run out of business as a result of that. A consequential damage is a damage that goes as a consequence of the original breach and could never stop. It could go as ridiculous as to say, well, if the plant stops, the consequence of the plant stopping, it's people losing their jobs. So you'll have to also compensate for the loss of the wages of that people losing their jobs as a result of the plant being stopped because you couldn't produce the right water. It's an enormous stretch, right? In Mexico, we have what they call daño directo y material, isn't it? Civil code. That means that the link, a causation link, isn't it, between the event and the damage has to be truly connected, clearly connected. Otherwise, like in the US, consequential damages can be endless. Do you see the difference? Compensatory damages, consequential damages. All right. Please. Next, please. Another type of liquidated damages. Have you heard about penas convencionales? Have you? No? Penas convencionales. It's in Mexico. It's a penalty in which you and I have a contract. I'm the guy constructing the Starbucks. You're the party that entrusted me that work. I'm late 1 month of the works. The liquidated damage penalty, or the penas convencionales, which is essentially the translation, it's we're going to agree in our contract that for every day that you're late, I'm going to retain from you an amount of money from your penalty, right? From your consideration. Those are my terms for hiring you as a contractor. If you're late, I'm going to penalize you for every day until you finish. The other party might say, if that's the case, this is not going to be a good deal for you. So I'm expecting to receive 1 million pesos. And if you penalize me for every day with 5,000 pesos, for instance, I'm going to lose my margin, etc. This is the deal. You want it or not? This is only to say it's a provision in which the parties include an automatic mechanism through which they will be penalized automatically, without actually going to court. Because they already have the recipe there if somebody fails to comply. For instance, if the party that entrusted the works is late in payment, moratory interest is going to be there, isn't it? And this is moratorios. That's another way of including liquidated damages. Penas convencionales. Convencionales means convention. Convention is a contract, isn't it? So we are contracting our penalties. We are agreeing to the penalties that we're going to have to accept if there's a breach on the contract. Right? In Mexico, if a party, the non-breaching party might decide, I can either go through the penas convencionales way, or perhaps the breach is so substantial that whatever I get from that penalty provision is not sufficient enough as my remedy. So I better go off to the litigation route. I want more. This is going to be limited, which usually are 20% of the value of the contract, etc. If you go this way with the damages, you can now go the other way. This is it in our country. This is how it works. It's a provision. There's an article, Código Civil Federal, that states this. That way or that way. Okay? Yes.
And what if our clients fail to the work consequences?
Okay, good question. If those consequences are not respected, if the mechanism is not respected, then you go to court. No, it shouldn't be. That's why you have to put something in the language of the contract by saying, if we need to go, if there's something wrong, if there's a breach of the contract, and we decide, or I decide, non-breaching party decide to go through the liquidated damages provision, I want to make that liquidated damage based as automatic as possible. Which way? Well, if I owe some money to the party producing the works or in charge of the works, automatically I'm going to retain a portion of them. I'm not going to pay them. Right? That's an automatic way to collect. It's not a collection, though. It's not a non-payment, right? And that's it. Yes. Exactly. That could be one. So compensatory damages, consequential damages, liquidated damages. Yes.
Referring to damages, is there a certain criteria for their evaluation? Up to parties?
It's really up to the parties. But we might say that there are business standards, right? For instance, for many years, I've seen that liquidated damages in a deal are capped or limited to 20% of the value of the contract. So that Starbucks construction contract that we enter into, I might say, I'm going to penalize you for every day that you're late. Or for instance, if you gave me a Starbucks that it doesn't resemble a Starbucks, you didn't perform in accordance with the terms and conditions of the construction, I'm going to penalize you as well. But the other party, being very smart as you are, you're going to say, okay, that's fine. I accept that penalty, but we need to cap it. Otherwise, the business it's not going to make any sense, monetarily speaking, right? So you put a cap. And that cap, it's a standard in the industry. Let's go from 10% to 20% of the value of the contract. So that means even though I'm really, really late, right? I cannot be, and it's a 1 million pesos deal, I cannot be penalized for more than 200,000 pesos. You agree that? That's why sometimes when the breach is so substantial, the non-breaching party might say, you know what? I'm not interested in 200,000 pesos. This is so wrong that I'm going to sue this guy. I better go to court, right? I want blood. I want to put him out of business. He's so bad in performing Starbucks. You see, that's a criteria. But that's your choice as non-breaching party, and you want to have those choices, right? It all depends. But it's not in the law. It's an industry criteria. If you're on the side, if you're I'm the business guy entrusting somebody to create that building, erect that building. If you're my lawyer, you want to make sure that we have a provision in the contract that indicates liquidated damages. I want to have an automatic mechanism to penalize if the other party goes wrong. If you are on Axel's side, and Axel is the constructor of that Starbucks, you want to make sure that that liquidated damage provision is limited. Otherwise, you find it's very exposed. Yes, Vanessa.
That'd be easy if I can remember. I was reading a little bit about the consequential damages here in Mexico. There is no stipulated. It is not stipulated on the code.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no prohibition either. So we can't put it on the contracts. But the bad thing is that there will be no enforceability. 'responsibility from the judges. Maybe they will not be able to enforce it.
Yes,
So my question is, can we put them as liquidated damages, like composite?
yes,
Maybe that could be like a preventive way to contemplate them without, I mean, because we can do them, we can stipulate them as consequential,
yes.
but so.
Let me
Yeah.
interrupt you a little bit. You can have both. Let's say that this is not a contract that is in Mexico. You can have a provision for liquidated damages, and you can have a provision on compensatory damages, and you can have another provision on consequential damages. You can have the three. You can have the whole Christmas tree there, right? In Mexico, if you say in a contract, perhaps this is your question, if I say there, if you badly perform, you're going to be subject to consequential damages. Then I go to court to ask for those, and the judge will say, well, this is non-existent in Mexico's law. You cannot collect out of this. You can collect compensatory, and you can apply for liquidated damages as well. That's fine. But you know what? I mean, if you're, depending on which side you're on, right? But if you want to, if you're on the side of of your client being the one that's entrusting for those works to be performed, you want to feel that your client is protected. So put, again, the whole Christmas tree. We'll see if at some point we'll have to enforce consequential damages or not. Perhaps we can put that provision there and subject our contract to New York law and arbitration, and then it's going to be enforceable. That's why you need to understand a little bit more, not only Mexican law, but because you can use some American law concepts that can be enforceable, but not in Mexico law. But you can move the venue and you can move the law to other states. There's a lot of contracts that are subject to New York law because New York is very progressive in terms of courts and deals. So if we're going to make this deal, why don't we subject it to New York law and arbitration in New York? It's sophisticated. They're expensive as well, of course, but yes.
I see that mutual exclusive. There could be a certain situation where a party is entitled to the three types of damages in one contract.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes, because it's not that difficult, really. Liquidated damages is something that starts out easy peasy, right? You're late 1 day, 2 days, and the count already started. And then it stops, right? And then perhaps during the US, even though I penalize you with that small part liquidated damages and it capped, I'm suffering from your very substantial breach. So I'm going to go to court. I'm going to try to convince the court by saying, I would like to have my compensatory damages now. And since this deal was not created and my Starbucks franchise store was not ready, I was supposed to get by now $3 million, but I couldn't sell anything because this guy didn't perform. And that's a consequential damage.
And then for expenses as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What do I need to check for that? Case law. I need to see other cases that were resolved in that way. And I'm sure that the other party is going to find case law to defend his client to say he's not supposed to pay for that amount of damages. That's litigation.
That's also like the importance of the language, of the
Absolutely.
amplified language, because maybe you can put some liquidated damages into the conventional or the consequential or
Right.
something damages, and you need to call them exactly what they are. So,
And then you cannot enforce.
yeah.
The clarity of the language is so important because otherwise, perhaps if it's mixed up and not sufficiently clear, it cannot be enforceable, perhaps. Or perhaps you're stepping into some certain provision that it's non-existent in Mexican law or non-existent in US law, etc.
How does it work when the parties are from different countries, like what goal or
Great question. They decide upon that.
it's still a matter of
will of the parties, la voluntad.
Yes, but if they don't agree to something,
Ajá.
who they go with?
To ventilate their dispute to the venue they selected. If Facultad de Jurisprudencia entrusts manufacture this furniture, right? They might decide to have, if they have a dispute and that Chinese company is not performing well, they might have a dispute not in China, of course not, and perhaps the Chinese company said, I don't want to go to Mexico. Okay, let's decide middle terms. Let's go to New York.
So they choose what they
Yes. They choose law and they choose venue for dispute. They're entitled to it. And there's also another thing. They might select international standard commercial terms, right? For that deal to be created. That exists as well.
I remember that one I read, I had to search for that because we didn't agree for the.
Venue,
And.
jurisdiction, venue.
Jurisdiction. And what the parties decided is at the end of the contract or at the beginning,
Mhm.
put the date and the place where you sign
Yes.
the contract.
Uh-huh.
So they say, we signed it in Saltillo.
Uh-huh.
So they were from New Mexico. I guess,
Okay. Okay.
Or, no, it was, yes, New Mexico. And that's how they interpreted it.
Uh-huh.
They said, okay, if we signed it, if we were there,
Uh-huh.
then of course we did it here and then we send it,
They sign it there.
signed
Yes.
They send it,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
but we didn't know. And they were like, we're good, let's just.
The romantic phase. Yes.
So that
Absolutely.
was our, like, our point of view,
Uh-huh.
that, well, it says Saltillo, Coahuila.
Right.
And the date, and they say, okay, let's do it that way.
Right.
So maybe it can help you in case it happens.
I was wondering what jurisdiction have to choose.
They don't, yes, but if they don't choose, I mean, they can say it.
Mhm.
But if they don't choose, you can use that type of agreement. In
Um,
that case, it helps that we added that part. That in Saltillo, Coahuila, if people were
together.
together, they decided this and that and that. That's why we had like una protección for those companies to, I'm gonna say this in Spanish, just to I can find the word.
Sure.
El problema era entre el otro abogado y yo, que no lo pusimos. Entonces dijimos, pues vamos a decirle a los dueños o a los representantes que usemos el de Saltillo, porque en el texto dice que es Saltillo. O sea, no podemos decir, híjole, se nos olvidó poner qué tipo de jurisdicción íbamos a usar. Entonces, that was like an agreement between
And that is fine. The only problem is that if I were the New Mexico company, right, which entered into a contract with a Saltillo company, and we forgot about it, I would not consent immediately
No.
to Saltillo's courts.
Exactly.
Why? I mean, let's go to New Mexico then, right? It's my field, isn't it?
What is the jurisdiction of the person or what the damage person costs? What is not convenient for them? How are they gonna?
It's a great question. Even the terms, for instance, let's say they agreed on that Saltillo, New Mexico contract. They agreed on consequential damages, and then decide to ventilate a controversy out of that contract in Saltillo. Consequential damages are off. So that's a legal strategy as to decide upon venue. That's called venue shopping. Right? You have to be there. What's best for your client, right? And never forget the jurisdiction clause as well. Right? When some provisions are not agreed upon, you need to check the law and case law. Meaning law, statute, enacted Congress statutes, or case law. It fills the gaps of your country. There's always gaps. Some are very obvious gaps, some are not as obvious, right? Sometimes You didn't foresaw that there was a pandemic coming in, and of course that was not in. So what do we do? Right. Okay,
That's,
sure.
sorry, that's why many of the international companies and agreements are just taken to a mediator or
Sure.
an arbitration.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And even so, there are rules like how to decide on the arbitrator or the mediator.
Right.
And
Whenever you purchase a book in Amazon, I hope you purchase books in Amazon. Books. You submit yourself to the terms and conditions that Amazon is putting before you. Right? Because that doesn't, I mean, let's not talk about one book, but a million books. A substantial amount of money involved in a transaction. So you're submitting yourself by just clicking I agree, putting your credit card to the terms and conditions that they have there somewhere in their site. And that's what you're subjected to. Someone reads the terms and conditions of Amazon when they purchase a book? Of course not. Who cares? But if there's a substantial matter, a substantial transaction, that actually matters.
yeah, well, like the Facebook thing about the terms and conditions recently, and WhatsApp also,
Right.
they changed it and started like promoting it, and then they redo them again.
Right. The fine print. La letra chiquita. Okay. I wanted the types of can have a semester on damages, right? There's a lot to it, but just to have like a broad perspective, yes.
And sorry,
Sure.
and to the first question, you said that after the pandemic, there should be like new office. What I do think is that for the next inputter,
Uh-huh.
for the next union, they will have to adapt them.
Uh-huh.
And that would be more, because it was all about the traffic, international traffic,
Yes.
with what caused all the damages from production.
Right.
and
Failures, breaches.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. So I do think maybe that's a positive in contract, but what would be interesting would be the impact.
Do you know what Incoterms means?
Commerce.
International, can you speak up?
International terms of commerce.
Right. There are already a set of concepts and definitions, commercially wise, contractually wise, for parties to rely upon. Right? Incoterms are called. Why? Because when international trade started out in a more, let's say, powerful way, some, I don't know, 50 years plus, even more than that. Parties had to reside not only on their own country's terms or the other party's country's terms, but an international set of commerce terms, Incoterms. And those are updated every once in a while. This has to give you the sense of contractual law being a very homologated type of branch of the law, internationally wise. Right. That's the efforts of the country. And those are international treaties in which countries actually enter to adjust and submit to those international regulation in terms of commerce. Sometimes I've seen that parties in two countries doing business say, in the contract, they add a clause saying, these are our terms for this transaction. And all the international commercial terms that are out there are not going to be governing our deal. They accept those. Why? Because perhaps they're not beneficial to the parties. And they agree to that. Right? It's possible. So just to complicate things matter a little bit more, if there's two parties entering into a contract, and that contract was an oral contract, and something goes wrong, then you have to look into what are the parties' legal regulation in that party's countries, the other one as well, and the international terms that govern commercial law. It's a mess. See, it's a mess. which is the one to govern? There is laws for that, to fill those gaps, but it's more complicated and it's more expensive and time consuming. It's better to agree in writing, what is it exactly that you want for that a deal to govern that deal? The terms. What do you want in, what do you want out, etc. This is what you tell to your clients. Yes? All right, please. Next one, please. Next. Sorry, I'm gonna have to jump into just to, again, this is liability. Next. Contracts, 15 minutes. Next, please. I said before in this session that we were talking about contract creation, right? Contract formation. The client can come at a moment in which the contract is at 0 and they're requesting for you to draft it, which is great because you're in the genesis of the deal. That's good. It's not polluted or contaminated the language of a certain contract. What are the recommendations for that specific moment in which the client says, I want to buy that piece of land because I want to grow grapes and make wine in Arteaga, Coahuila. Okay, so you want to purchase a land, how much is it? Does the other party has the proper deed? El título, la escritura pública, does it have produced evidence enough to show ownership of that land, etc. Right? You have to fully understand what is the transaction about. Sometimes, and this happens when we're young. I was young once as well. You think that you don't want to make some questions because you might, I don't know, tire your client, or perhaps you're a little bit embarrassed, or perhaps you want to show that if you make some questions, you might show some sort of weakness because you're making some questions and you're given the sense that you don't understand the situation. BS. Nonsense. You need to make many questions to fully understand the deal. Forget about being ashamed of doing the right question because you need to understand that transaction. That's your job. If somebody goes to the doctor and asks the doctor, I'm feeling ill, the doctor will make you a lot of questions, isn't it? Just to try to understand what's going on with you and your health. You're in the same position. You have to listen closely to their contracting motivation. Why do you want to do this business? You have to sometimes step a little bit further in your role as lawyer. What is it that you want? Is it accurate to buy that piece of land in Arteaga and not in Los Cabos? Is this the right market right now for it? Is that the right price? Who's the other party to this contract? Try to picture the whole thing, right? Put that Superman cap. Get it out. Understand the leverage. And what does that mean? The leverage. It's a used word a lot in the US. And I'm sure if you all watched Suits, which I know you love, the show, leverage it's a word that is used a lot. And it's basically those advantageous positions in the negotiation. If I'm gonna purchase a very specific piece of machinery, a German piece of machinery for my company to produce this furniture. The leverage in that point, meaning the party that is more strong to set the terms and conditions for that transaction, it's going to be the German company, because they're so specialized in manufacturing this piece of equipment that there's no one else, right? And it's going to be very difficult for me to set the terms and conditions of the purchase. If they said the machinery is $1 million, said no, I can only pay 100,000. So okay, next. They skip you away because they have more leverage. If I would like, I'm a house owner and I would like to contract some plumbing services. I'm sorry, this is a very primary example. When I have plumbing services and the guy says, well, for that job, I'm gonna price you 2,000 pesos. No, that's too expensive. Next, I'm gonna call another guy. Leverage isn't me, right? Leverage isn't me. I'm gonna set the price for that deal. But if that same plumbing happens when, for instance, after the flooding that was experienced in Houston some months ago, after that very icy moment, right? All the piping in the city was basically destroyed. What do you think was placing the leverage? The house owners of the plumbers? And leverage can change throughout the transaction a lot. It might switch from one party to the other through negotiation. But that's something that you need always to understand. Work as my client and me as a consultant, as a legal consultant, in terms of leverage, who's in a better position. Otherwise, you're not getting the deal. Right? And sometimes you can ask the client openly, how do you feel before this deal? You strong? Is somebody else behind you in terms of if you don't do it, somebody else will? Are you who's controlling the situation? Right? You're not going to find this in codes and laws, statutes, case law. No, this is something that you need to develop. It's a sensitivity that only experience can bring. Right? But look for it. Leverage. Identify who's going to hold the pen. Who's going to write those terms and conditions of the contract. It's holding the pen. Preparing the draft. If you can do it, do it. Not only because you're going to charge more to your client, but because you're going to draft the terms of the deal in your own terms, right? Now, perhaps the other party's lawyer is going to say, well, I have some comments to it. I would like to delete this, add this. And, okay, that's another dance. But the starting out position is yours. Do it. I recommend it. Try to avoid this situation. It's very typical from business people. Let's prepare a contract and let's send it to a potential client and then starts negotiation upon that. Wrong. Meaning, I can sell those chairs. Let's prepare a contract for that. I think I have a potential client, and let's send the contract and have a reaction from the other guy. Wrong. A contract is not a tool for negotiation. Negotiation has to come first, and the contract is going to frame the conclusion of that negotiation, right? But it's very typical for clients to say, why don't you start preparing a contract? Say, I have a great business deal. So you start preparing a contract, and that can give you some taste with potential clients. Wrong, my friend. What I can do, though, is prepare a bullet point document in which the general terms of your business deal is written down, and that can serve you as a teaser of the call to tease the interest of the parties. That's a difference. But to elaborate a complex contract without having actually a counterparty to enter into that, that's just wrong. Okay? Because if that's being done, negotiation is going to be endless. Endless. Right? In your minds then. First, negotiation and basically an agreement, and then document that. Right? And if you can hold a pen to that, even better. This is what I was trying to say in the third bullet is try it baby steps. The negotiation between the parties to sell those chairs is working out. We have decided now design. We have decided color. We have decided price so far. That's great. But it's not a moment to design a complex contract for that. Let's put that in writing. As of today, Teachers' Day, by the way, May 15. We have agreed this. We have agreed this. And this is something that you, after the meeting in which you accompany your client, you go back to your office, open your laptop and said, this is the result of a meeting we had today. We agreed to price, color, design, and perhaps day for delivery. There's much more to be discussed. This is not right, Maduro. Still some missing parts there, but so far, this is what we have. And you go baby steps. And then after that, you begin to create a more complex, elaborate terms and conditions contract to the extent they began to evolve. The most important deal that I've been involved in, it's a $1 billion deal. It started out, it was between 6 parties, not 2. Armies of lawyers of 6 different companies. Companies belonging to different countries. Spanish company, German company, Mexican company, Japanese company. Like a joke, right? It was Japanese and Mexican, right? It was a joke. $1 billion deal. We set the starting negotiation spot in a 2-document page. It ended up in a 100-page document, which I prepared. Months later, through which the evolution of the deal was getting more clear. The first deal was, are we good? Do we want to go to this dance or not? Yes. Sign it. If you want to walk away later, that's fine. We're going to have that open window clause in our 2-page contract. The window is going to be open if somebody at some point decides not to go because things have changed for some reason. But if you're in, sign it today. And the same parties that signed in November of 20, I remember this date, like 2010, 9 p.m. in Mr. Carlos Slim office. 8 months later, it became the same amount of parties, a 100-page document, 100-page, no one walked away. So you began to print some psychology to the deal because you control the pen and you propose these type of things and you control the deal and you share with the rest of the companies and their lawyers how important it is to begin documenting the steps that you are going through. No one does this. No one cares. You should. This is the suggestion, right? You should. Perhaps it's gonna sometimes feel funny, like, what are you looking at? We're not done yet. I know. Well, we're done with this, isn't it? Or somebody's gonna back out from getting the blue chair. Oh, we're already at written color. Great. Let's put it in writing. Bullet points. That's it.
For example, in that example, that are like six parties, decide who will defend. How do you decide?
I propose no one reject it. It's a lot of work. And people, not everyone is willing to do it. It's a lot of work. So I said, I'll take it. And everyone said, okay, great. He's going to take it. And it was a lot, but it was a lot of experience as well. The terms that I proposed at the end stayed with a lot of comments throughout negotiations. But I could control the document. Hold the control of the transaction. That makes you a better transaction lawyer. It's very different when you come in, when somebody else is holding the pen, it's different. Sure.
And what about like if in that contract, someone else is doing it, but changes like the role? Like say it's $1 million, but changes like for this company, it's gonna take more than that. Like
That changes the terms and conditions of the deal.
yeah, but the other people didn't notice until the contract was
So
already signed.
there's no deal then. Again, if there's no agreement on the terms and conditions between all of those parties, there's no deal at all. So that's why it was a very complex installation that we, as constructor companies, will have to do. This is for, by the way, for the largest wastewater treatment plant that exists in the world. It sits in Mexico City. Clean up water from Mexico City. large budgets. But we don't agree on the basics. No agreement at all. What can you do? Put it in a napkin. I don't have a notebook right now to write it down. Put it in a napkin. And then you get to your house. There is precedent of a napkin being, of a deal written down in a napkin being enforced. Okay, so we'll check that.
Have you ever seen their concept?
Sure.
They went, like, not even that time, but he said, okay, pay me whatever you want, like $1 or whatever you want, but that's a concept.
That's how,
They concept. But for me to,
and that's consideration. It's important, regardless of the amount. That's consideration for contract basis. Perhaps you want to release it better than Paul Saul. Now it's going to make more sense. So you do napkins, you do bullet points, you do term sheets, you do letter of intent, LOIs, you do MOUs, memorandum of understanding. Regardless of the name, it doesn't matter. Are preliminary documents that evidence the intent of the parties of entering into a more complex transaction in the short, medium, or long term. You don't have to wait till the end to have the complex contract. Baby steps. Baby steps that you can control. Right? Please. Just go back. It's very important, though, throughout those baby steps, those documents, just to determine whether it's that deal, it's binding or not binding, vinculante or not. Right? Because if it's binding, that means that no one can walk away. And perhaps it's too early to tell. If it's not binding, some might say, well, if it's not binding, what the hell you need a document for? Right? Somebody just can walk away at any moment. That's the true pushback. The only thing is this type of document serves as more like a psychological type of deal in which the parties already share their intent, even if it's not binding. Okay? Do it, please. If it's already a contract that exists and somebody comes to you for assistance to amend or change the contract, it's a different perspective, isn't it? You need to understand really, in the first place, you need to understand the deal. A deal that it's being created for the first time. In this other case, when they're consulting you to amend the contract, you need to understand what's behind it. First of all, is there a contract already? Is that contract enforceable? What are the terms and conditions of that contract? What are the changes that the parties are expecting? What are the reasons for their changes to be coming in place, etc., etc. Right? And then you can make amendments or addendums or modificatory agreements, etc. That would be the results of those changes. Don't be afraid to ask questions. What are your job? Please. Another assistance could be to terminate a contract. This is even a little bit more interesting. Is why you want to terminate a contract. Is there a problem? Well, there is. Okay, let's check the penalties clauses. Right? Let's see if there's liquidated damages, compensatory damages. What are the liability of the parties as a result of this termination? Have you thought about that? Well, no, I just want to finish it. Well, let's see. Allow me to check on this, and I'll give you my opinion as to what are the types of problems or liabilities or risks that you might face as a result of this pretended termination. You need to understand them in full. And my friends, this is one deal. At some point in your lives, you're going to be dealing with different deals at the time. Some deals being created for the first time, some other consultancy on deals that are already in place that want to be changed, some other terminated. Many things at the same time. You're going to be like, Said this before. There's a lot of consultation on, do we have a contract? I sent out an email to the chairs. I never got an answer. Then the chairs came in. The chairs didn't comply with what I wanted to in the first place. Should I pay this guy or not? This is the type of qualities that usually arise. You need to understand. You need to make the right questions. You need to open up and say, okay, sit down. Let me take some notes. Explain. From square one. Let's see. Question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to be the questioning. Never be afraid. Okay? Listen to your client, make the right questions, develop client trust, conduct good research, watch out for the battle of the forms. I'll give you that in a minute. Draft the proper wording, and always take notes. Always, always, always take notes, please. The weakest pencil is stronger than the most prodigious mind. Right? Don't be afraid to take notes. Don't be lazy in taking notes. This taking notes, whether in writing or whether typing those, accommodate your mind toward that deal, toward that consultation that was brought before you. Right? Do it. It's an amazing process. Because the thing is that you need to process that, you need to digest something that perhaps is not really clear from your client. Then you have to, comes from the mind and the mouth of the client. And then you have to process it in your mind and has to go through your hand and writing. And it's magic when those two extremes can actually concur. But sometimes they don't, because sometimes clients, they're not clear on what they want. So by doing that writing process, you're gonna examine whether the consultation in the first place is clear or not, or whether you have to go back and make the right questions to clear that. All right. Questions? Law 101 covers a lot of ground. I think that this should be read legal English, really, because it really captures throughout different chapters, different topics of American law in a very easy to read and digest matters. Feynman, Law 101, J. Feynman. You can buy this in Amazon easily. I think this is 4th edition. I believe this is a 5th edition as well. Constitutional law, contract law, torts, etc. Criminal law, for those interested in criminal law. Litigation is here. Law in America. This is Horace M. Friedman. This guy has a lot of books, and this particular small book, it's connected to a lot. I mean, it has a lot of reference to other books, right? That's right. Law in America. Friedman. Can you pass that on to me? I see that there's people having some trouble to read them. And Black Law Dictionary series, business law terms. Business law terms. This is like the brother of the marvelous Black Law Dictionary. Black Law Dictionary. There's all sorts of editions for the Black Law Dictionary. Black Law Dictionary has like all types of legal concepts, but this is basically focused on business law terms. Any question? Clear as oil, Bendix oil. Thank you so much, Ben. I really enjoy being here. Next session we're going to have on Friday, Anna, right? Friday. Friday and Saturday is gonna be a little bit different. This is the part of the, everything has to be different, right? There's legal translation. So, and it's basically a workshop. There's no more, I mean, there's gonna be a little bit of this, but it's basically jumping into the translation pool and that's it. Me being here, trying to assist you in some, let's say, fundamentals. Please bring your laptops because you're gonna be working here, right? Bring your laptops. Throughout the week, I'll send some exercises to Ana so she can convey them to you. We'll go through some of the essentials of legal translation and then we'll jump into it. That's for Friday, 6 to 9, and that's for Saturday, 10 to 1. And then we're gonna say goodbye. All right? All right. Thank you so much. Have a nice weekend.
Bueno, bueno, muchas gracias a todas y a todos por venir. Como dijo el licenciado Fabián, la próxima sesión va a ser el viernes de 6 a 9 p.m. Igual, los que gusten venir, totalmente bienvenidos, los que sigan tomando en línea también. Y terminamos el viernes, el siguiente sábado, igual, a esta hora de 10 a 1, y pues va a ser mucho más, como decía Fabián, mucho más práctico. Y pues bueno, muchas gracias a todos otra vez. Cualquier duda, estamos a sus órdenes y les vamos a enviar material por el correo.
Gracias.
Gracias, bien. Oigan.